Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the fourth and final day of the Mexico Cannabis Summit, an event that we're sure is going to mark a before and an after for the Mexican cannabis industry, in that this is an event where we not only get to know great people, but also create ideas, educate ourselves, and assume our role as stakeholders in this nascent industry. My name is Adrian Cisneros. I'm head of Harris Brick in Mexico office, an international law firm with offices in the United States, Mexico, Brazil, Spain, and China. We have a strong cannabis practice that we're now expanding into Mexico. I have the utmost pleasure of introducing Carl Palme, CEO and founder of the startup Boundless Robotics Incorporated. Carl is, correct me if I'm wrong, I understand that you're a native Bostonian.
I'm actually, de hecho, soy mexicano, nativo mexicano. I'm a Mexican native, but I've been living in Boston for the past 20 years. And so I'm happy to represent Mexico in Boston, and especially in the fields of robotics and artificial intelligence.
Great, you have the best of both worlds, man. So, his company, Boundless Robotics, seek to marry artificial intelligence, robotics, of course, and hydroponics into a whole new product that is affordable for everyone who wants to start out in the horticultural industry in general, and the cannabis industry in particular. And in that respect, I would like to start with the very first question about your company. I was looking at your website, and you were explaining there the reasons, and I would like you to share those with the audience about why you started offering products only for the cannabis industry, even though this technology can be applicable for the agribusiness industry in general.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things about cannabis is the plant is very valuable, right? It's expensive. And for people who depend on cannabis for their wellness routine, or for anything in particular, I mean, people for sleeping, managing their anxiety, pain management, even PTSD, right? Having control over the plant that you're growing and giving you the power to get this plant, to know that it's always going to be there, and then also consume something that you know for a fact is pesticide free, you know where it came from. But also, once you grow this plant, you're getting 2 ounces or 56 grams of high quality flower, some of the best stuff that you're going to be able to find. It's fresh. For those people who use it as part of their wellness routine, it's a very important part. And so, yes, while we are focusing on cannabis right now, this is a technology that once we develop all the infrastructure, all the data for the artificial intelligence, we could apply it to anything. I mean, I've grown arugula in my plant, and it's some of the best arugula that I've ever tasted. But cannabis is definitely, focusing on one specific crop is going to give us all the data that we need to be able to get into other industries in the future.
Absolutely. There you are. What a great introduction. Well, Carl, the floor is yours.
Excellent, thank you. So, in the spirit of education, right, which has been this whole conference, we've been learning a lot about cannabis. But I think, as a nerd and as a person who loves using technology to solve problems, I wanted to talk a little bit about how, what are the new technologies that are definitely going to impact the cannabis industry, right? And being somebody who has worked in artificial intelligence and robotics, those are 2 fields that I'm very familiar with. And I'd love to talk about those. And one of the things that I always find is that in order to understand something, you have to learn about it, right? And how do I apply it if I don't know what it is? And artificial intelligence happens to be one of those things that people consider, it's like, it's artificial intelligence, right? It's something that is so incredible that people, I think, are sometimes afraid of it. And they're afraid of how this artificial intelligence may take over humanity, right? And that's not the case. I mean, it is just a technology. And so why don't we start there? Why don't we talk a little bit about artificial intelligence? I have a slide. I don't know, Adrian or Fer, if you can go to that slide. Here we go. Yep. The next one. So artificial intelligence and robotics. The way you have to think about these things is that they're just automation tools, right? And automation equals efficiency. And all industries in the world can benefit from efficiency, right? And so in cannabis, what's interesting about cannabis is that this is an industry that is new, it's growing a lot. And we're gonna see things like artificial intelligence and robotics coming in because they're gonna help make the industry that much more efficient. So if we go to the next slide, let's talk about artificial intelligence, right? What is artificial intelligence? And artificial intelligence is nothing magical or mystical. It's really just a wide-ranging branch of computer science. And it has been around since the 1950s. And the whole purpose of artificial intelligence is to be able to build smart machines that are capable of performing tasks that typically require human intelligence. And as you can see from the chart there, everything started with artificial intelligence, but then a part of artificial intelligence called machine learning came about, and that is where you can teach machines to learn by themselves if you create that infrastructure. And then there's deep learning, which is a subset of machine learning as well. But the idea here is that if we can create something that can learn like humans do and can create operations that humans are normally required to do, then we're going to see a paradigm shift that is going to be incredible, right? I mean, this is going to be so revolutionary. And if you add that with cannabis, which is also going to be so revolutionary for a country like Mexico, we're just going to see something, some real magic happen. And I'm super excited about that. And so if we go to the next slide, let me explain a little bit about how artificial intelligence is different than traditional software. If you can see that diagram on the top, traditional software, and I'm making this very basic and very easy for I think anybody to understand. Traditional software is like a bunch of logical statements, right? If this, then that, right? That's the basic of how software works. An example would be if I wanted to create a switch to turn on a light, I would say, if the switch is up, then turn on the light, else keep it off, right? Very basic, very simple. But if you think about this and how programmers, if you see that diagram, right, the programmer creates the program and then the computer processes it and it creates an output, right? So if I turn the switch up, the light turns on. But now let's think about something a little bit more complex. For example, let's think about describing the cannabis leaf to a computer. How would we do that with if then else statements, right? If it is green and it has 3 leaves or 5 leaves or 7 leaves or 8 or 9, and it is sometimes curling up, but sometimes curling down, and maybe sometimes it's yellow, and it starts getting very complex. And now we have to differentiate what a cannabis leaf looks like than a maple leaf, right? And all of a sudden you have a mess of a problem. And this is where artificial intelligence comes in. If you look at the diagram below, artificial intelligence is all about the data. And like I said, artificial intelligence is creating these machine learning algorithms is very similar to how humans learn, right? And so if you see the diagram below, we have inputs and we have outputs. What that means is if I have a bunch of pictures of cannabis leaves and I say, these are all pictures of cannabis leaves, and then I have a bunch of pictures of maple leaves and I say, these are all pictures of maple leaves, I can feed it into the computer, and then the computer creates that program that now understands what a cannabis leaf looks like and what a maple leaves look like. And what's really incredible about artificial intelligence is that it can deal with all the variability, right? Because with traditional software, you expect everything to be very static. But with organisms like plants, they're all over the place, right? And so artificial intelligence can tell you whether it's seeing a cannabis plant or not with a certain degree of confidence, right? And so
okay, just a quick stop there, Carl.
yeah.
I have a question there that perhaps the audience is already thinking about asking.
Mm-hmm.
So in some, we are teaching through artificial intelligence, we're teaching a device how to discern in order to be more flexible, so you cannot, so you do not have to be inputting information all the time. That's what creates efficiency.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And what's nice about this is we have these compute resources now that make it possible, right? And so I can take all of these pictures of all the cannabis plants that I've ever seen and all the things that are not cannabis plants, and it'll create a program. And what's interesting is that program, right? So now when we think about the program and what it's going to do, now I can have a vision system that can look at a cannabis plant, understand that it's cannabis, understand whether it has a nutrient deficiency, for example, understand how well it's growing, understand where the buds are. And so all these things that are very complicated, we've now been able to teach to a computer. And when you talk about machine learning, a lot of it continues to learn, right? If you architect it correctly. And so in some cases, if it sees something that it thinks it's a cannabis plant, but it's really a maple plant or a maple tree, you can say, no, this is actually a maple tree, and then the computer can keep learning, right? So that is what's really incredible. If we go to the next slide, we can talk a little bit about all the things that you can do with machine learning and artificial intelligence. I don't know if you can scroll down a little bit. Mafer? There we go. All right. So many types of AI, right? And a lot of these are going to be, I just talked about vision, for example, explaining to a computer what something is, but you can do things like speech or natural language processing. Everybody here, most everybody here might have an Alexa or a, one of these little Google devices or Siri from Apple, right? These are natural language processing. And so if you think about the problem there, I have an accent, you have an accent, everybody has an accent, but all of a sudden these computers learned how to understand what it is that we're asking them, and they can deal with all the accents, they can understand context, and this is all possible through artificial intelligence. Another example that is very readily available is with phones. When you unlock it with your face, that's actually an artificial intelligence. So artificial intelligence, as you can tell, is everywhere in the world, right? And so if we go to the next slide, let's talk about some examples of how you can apply artificial intelligence to solve your problems. When we think about artificial intelligence, there's really three types of problems. I don't know if you can scroll down a little bit for the next slide, Adrian. There we go. So AI applications, right? We can think about process automation. So a lot of repetitive processes. One example is, for example, pre-COVID, we all traveled and we all had receipts that we had to scan. Well, with this vision system, you can scan the receipt, and then the AI knows that this is a receipt, what the restaurant name is, what your total is, what your tax is, and then it fills everything out in a form, right? So it's automating a process. That's one thing that we can do with artificial intelligence, is how do we look at all of our data and how do we think about automating these processes so that I don't have to do it all the time. Another example is with cognitive insight problems. So where you have a large amount of data and you have to make a quick decision. An example of this is with banks. How do they detect fraudulent transactions, right? So they understand with data what, this is a normal transaction. And then when they see something that is unique, within milliseconds, it can understand whether it is a fraud with a certain degree of confidence, right? And this is something that becomes superhuman, right? Because a human cannot look at all the data that's happening in all the transactions in the world, but a computer can, and it can understand with a certain degree of confidence that there is a fraud. Another example is Google AdWords. When you Google something, it's looking at all of your search history, who you are, where you are in the world, how other people are looking for stuff. And within milliseconds, it's deciding what kind of ad you want to have, right? And so this is another example of cognitive insight. And then cognitive engagement, right? So when we talk to machines, like for example, Alexa, or you are seeing a lot of these websites that now have chatbots where you go and you ask a question and it feels like you're talking to a human, right? And so these are the things that we can do with artificial intelligence. Now, if we pair that with robotics, and robotics are devices that can actually manipulate the physical world, then you have like some incredible superpowers, right? And so if we go to the next slide, Adrian, we can talk about the benefits of using robotics and AI in cannabis. One of which is optimized productivity, right? We talked about efficiency. So what if you could have a machine that could operate at a constant optimal speed without pause, right? 24/7. That would be incredible, right? And then the other thing is you're going to be able to do things faster than any human could, and with more precision. So optimized productivity is definitely one of the benefits that you get from combining the two. And because
just a quick pause there, Carl, because you raise a very important point in that efficiency is all the more important in cannabis because of the shorter cultivation cycle as compared to other plants. That's why it's important. That, in addition to the fact that you need to meet very specific grades and standards, particularly for medical use. So you need to have to be supervising the plants around the clock.
Yep, correct. Around the clock. You need to be able to harvest them at the right time. You need to be able to understand if there's an issue like a nutrient deficiency, so that you can actually be proactive and fix this problem before it becomes an issue, right? I mean, these plants are so expensive and so important that you want to make sure that you're always on top of the plant, right? And as you were saying, a consequence of this is the improved quality. By having these robots and these machines in place, you eliminate a lot of the human error. You can also improve the output of the quality, and it also enhances the customer satisfaction. So, who doesn't want that, right? Produce more and have happier customers, right? And so these are the things that technology are really good at when they're applied correctly. And the other thing is reduce costs. At least, for example, in the US and Canada, labor is expensive, but if you have a robot that can work around the clock, that doesn't require, sleep, things like that, then you can really maximize your productivity, right? And in some cases, not in cannabis, but in some cases, robots can work in lights out conditions, which means you don't have to spend money on air conditioners or lights or anything. The robots just deal with stuff. And so these are the three benefits that you can get really from combining robotics and artificial intelligence. And depending on what problem you're trying to solve, you can start thinking now about how I can apply these incredible things that are already being applied in other industries into the cannabis industry. If we go to the next slide, I have two examples of companies that are actually doing this. One is called Root.ai, and essentially it is a robot that has a vision system that goes up and down tomato farms, and it can recognize, you can see from the diagram on the right, when a tomato is ripe, when it's ready to be harvested, and then the robot can actually go in and harvest the tomato, right? And it's not going to apply too much pressure. You don't have the contamination that humans may have in their hands, and it's also going to harvest the tomato at the exact same, at the exact precise time that you want to harvest it, which I think is incredible.
Here's also the social impact of this, right? Because if you have a robot harvesting, I mean, you're also going to indirectly solve all the eventual labor and human rights issues that right now you see prevalent in U.S. fields and farm work.
Yeah, and that's another good point. I mean, people are always scared that robots and AI are going to take people's jobs, and that's not true. I mean, robots and AI are going to do things that either humans don't want to do, or that robots and AI are going to do so much of a better job that humans can then spend their time doing other value-added tasks that only humans can do, right? And so in a way, yes, robots can automate these tasks that nobody wants to do, and the humans who are working in the environment are going to have much more satisfaction from doing those jobs because they're not out in a farm just taking stuff off from trees, right, in the sun and things like that. So that is a great point. The next one, if you go to the next slide, that's actually a company that is more closely associated with cannabis. And this is Bloom Automation, where they're using a vision AI system to understand what the plant is and what it looks like. And then they have a very specific trimmer that can actually trim the flower, right? And it can do it much, much better than any human can and nonstop. And so when we talk about optimization, efficiency, but now we're talking about quality, right? These plants are going to be very consistent. The flower is going to be very consistent, and the machine is just doing what it is designed to do, thanks to robotics and artificial intelligence.
So now tell us how you do the magic here.
Yeah, excellent. So, well, let me start with how I started with this company. I happen to kill all plants. Any plant that I've ever had in my house, I kill. In fact, that plant that you see back there, that's made out of plastic, because if it was a real plant, I would kill it.
This is a good lesson for all our audience, because they see the results. They see the results of efforts, trial and error, and they think that it's very easy. I don't know any startup CEO or founder who hadn't screwed up at the beginning, right?
Oh, it's so hard. And with plants, it's so hard. And cannabis plants, yes, anybody can put something in the soil and maybe something will come up. But when you talk about a plant that is really used for somebody's wellness, like I was saying, to be able to function, right? Because it helps me with my pain, with my sleeplessness, things like that, you don't want to mess up. If you're going to spend the time to grow a plant, you want to make sure that it is the best plant and you're going to have the best, freshest flower that you can get, right? And this is a problem that is perfect for robotics and artificial intelligence. We can enable anybody in the world to grow cannabis like a professional, because we're using artificial intelligence and compiling all this data to make sure that the plant, no matter where in the world you are, the plant is going to grow the best it can, right? And oh, by the way, because we're using this incredible technology, it can also predict when things are going to happen. And therefore, we can remove some of the more expensive sensors from the machine and actually lower the cost. And so we're using artificial intelligence for two things. One is to lower the cost of the device so that it is more accessible to people, but also to help guarantee that the plant is going to grow incredibly well. And so if you go to the next slide, I can tell you about our product. It is the Annaboto. It is our AI-enabled set it and forget it device for growing cannabis automagically. And with it, you can expect to grow 2 ounces of high-quality pesticide-free cannabis, or 56 grams in Mexico and metric using countries. And really what's at the root of this is the artificial intelligence and the software that we've developed. The machine kind of looks like this. And like I said, I mean, we're using the artificial intelligence for 2 reasons. One is to lower the cost of the device, because we're leveraging software instead of using expensive sensors, and also to be able to guarantee that the plant is going to grow incredibly well, right? And that's at a low cost in the US, and eventually we're going to get to a lower cost in Mexico. But the way it works, if you go to the next slide, I can really explain how the artificial intelligence works. So the device has a series of sensors inside of it that are understanding what the environment looks like from temperature, humidity, water levels, water consumption, all those things. From the user, we get feedback on where in the world we are. And that's important because we're using a variation of deep water culture hydroponics. Hydroponics means that the roots are directly inside of the water. And so there is no soil, right? And this is great because it allows the plant to grow the fastest, but also things can go wrong if you don't monitor the nutrients very closely, right? You can kill the plant very quickly. But if we understand where in the world you are, we understand what kind of water composition you have, whether it's hard, whether it's soft, things like that. And therefore, we can adjust the recipes, the nutrient recipes accordingly, right? And the machine has a cartridge with several nutrients inside of it, and we can adjust those recipes very carefully.
You raise a very important point because, for instance, and I was going to tell you, in Mexico, you don't find the same type of water in northern Mexico that in central Mexico, which tends to be like sweeter, purer, or in the southeast when it's full of minerals.
Exactly.
Something that it's that sometimes ends with many cannabis growing projects before they even begin. It's a big issue here. It's important because your technology allows a standardization of the industry itself. Because if you allow everyone under their conditions to grow their cannabis products, then they're going to be able to meet the standards, notwithstanding they are in different parts of the country.
Correct. And it's all about consistency and quality, right? And that's what we want to maximize by using the artificial intelligence and varying the nutrients that we put in the water. And so this is important, right? Because now we understand what's happening. We have a light that has a vision system so it can understand how well the plant is growing, whether it has any nutrient deficiencies. And then this data we send up to the cloud every 15 minutes, right? And we have this server in the cloud that is not only looking at your machine with your plant, with your water conditions, but is looking at what everybody else out in the world is doing. And what's incredible about this and why artificial intelligence is so exciting is it can look at all of these machines, all the data, and then create optimized recipes for you on a weekly basis, right? And what's good about this is every single time you grow a plant, it's going to be better because we're continuing to learn, right? And we're learning at a scale that nobody else in the world can learn at, right? I mean, imagine being able to take information from all the devices out in the world growing cannabis plants, and then understanding what's working well under certain conditions and applying it to different, places in the world, right? And so we're really democratizing the power of artificial intelligence and enabling anybody to grow cannabis plants like a professional, right? And that to me is very exciting. And the nice thing about this is, if we collect the right data, we can actually apply the same artificial intelligence to now grow things like arugula or tomatoes or peppers, right? And so But in order to get started with artificial intelligence, because it's all about the data, is we have to pick one crop. And for us, that is cannabis. And it is incredible, I mean, because it's already solving so many different problems. But once we collect all that data, we can start applying it to other things. And so you bought this device to grow cannabis, but maybe next time you want to grow some peppers and make some salsa, right? And that is perfectly acceptable. And that is something that we're going to be looking to do in the future. And if you go to the next...
Sorry, before you move to the next slide, because this is also an important comment. You were mentioning in your website that's another one of the reasons why you started out with cannabis, in that since the growing cycle is shorter, as we have mentioned, it's easier to collect data regarding cannabis than regarding, I don't know, watermelon, for instance.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, with cannabis, we can expect to grow a plant every 90 days. And so you can imagine we can go through 4 cycles of the plant in a year. Whereas if we chose something like vanilla, which is expensive, you have to wait 3 years before you can harvest vanilla, right? And so if it's all about the data, then cannabis gives us that cyclic information that we can actually adapt from and leverage for other plants in the future. So that is a good point. Thanks for reminding me of that. And this is, I like this picture because we told 2 beginners, right? People who had never grown cannabis in their lives. We gave them very high genetics in the seeds, and we asked them, one, use our plant, the other one, figure it out, like most people would. And you can see from this diagram, the picture on the left is using our device, and the plant is growing healthy, you know, a lot of leaflets, it's beautiful. And the one on the right is struggling. And this is what happens usually when you try to grow something and you're not experienced, you don't have the time. It's a very labor intensive process. And if the plant doesn't germinate as well as it does in the, like, for example, with our machine, then you can expect that the flower is not going to be great either, right? And so this is a quick example of how using our technology is already enabling people, beginners, to grow like professionals, which is kind of our vision. And the only thing that the people have to do is just change the water weekly, which I think is going with the theme of making it as easy as possible by leveraging technology.
So you have experience in startup formation, obviously. So what opportunities do you see down here in Mexico for people like you who have an idea but are trying to implement it? They don't know how to make it true. Do you think that technology, considering internet or technology penetration in the country, do you think the opportunities and the landscape is going to be the same? Do you think there's going to be another Palme that can do what you do here in Mexico, given that those different conditions?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I've always been super impressed with Mexican engineers. They're very creative. They can do a lot with very little. And I look forward to seeing all the innovation that comes out of Mexico from these engineering schools like you know, ITAM and Politécnico, UNAM, universities that are world renowned. And I think there is a great opportunity to have this, you know, cannabis as an industry where you can actually create companies. Now, you know, Canada and the US and some of these countries, they want to look at things like robotics and artificial intelligence because now they're in the process of optimizing, right? And creating more efficiencies. But in Mexico, where this industry is brand new, I think the opportunities are a little bit different. And so if you go to the next slide, I think one of the first opportunities that I would consider people looking at is creating these point of sale systems and compliance systems, right? So point of sale technology, as you know, is when somebody checks out, you can keep their data and kind of understand what it is that people are doing. But I think in cannabis, it's going to be a lot more important because there is all this regulation that's going to be around the industry, that it's going to be important to understand kind of the seed to sale process, right? Where did the product come from and who is it being sold to? So you're going to be able to track sales, you're going to be able to manage inventory, and with artificial intelligence and with some machine learning, you'll be able to figure out what are the customer trends, right? What are the things that people are buying, where? The reason I think this is important is cannabis is a cash business. There's going to be federal compliance. One of the things that I would recommend that people look into when they're thinking about this is make sure that your system is reliable and scalable, right? Why? Because cannabis is going to blow up. And if you have a system that just works very well, it's very easy to use, and that anybody can just install it and get going, then you're going to see a lot of growth and success. But I think it's sometimes people don't really think about the importance of reliability and scalability. And I would encourage people to think about that as they think about the software that they're going to build. The next opportunity, if you go to the next slide, is I was looking at what was happening in Canada, where, for example, Canada is federally legal, right? And so what are the things that are different in Canada? And now that the consumer is a little bit different, what are they looking at? And if you look at the diagram on the right, 3 of the top 5 reasons for why somebody goes to a dispensary have to do with security and cybersecurity, right? People, there's so much stigma. People are so concerned about cannabis and, you know, all these bad things that they value the security over many other things. Like, for example, whether the store has convenient hours or whether they feel welcome there. Security
like
is
basic service questions, right?
Yes, exactly. I mean, but security is going to be a big deal. And because it's cannabis and there's a lot of money, there are going to be attacks, right? And so, you know, think about comprehensive surveillance capabilities. This is going to be a lot bigger than what you're traditionally used to doing in other businesses in Mexico. More robust building access control, right? I mean, you're going to have people who have access to the inventory, you know, to certain parts of the store, to different entryways. So this is going to be important. System documentation. I mean, the documentation bit is going to be super important. Data breaches. I mean, remember, there's still a lot of stigma. The last thing people want to find out is that there was a data breach, and now everybody knows that they're consuming cannabis, right? It's legal, it's fine, but people are still concerned about that. And so we have to think about encrypting all that data. And obviously there's going to be federal compliance, right? I mean, the government is going to have certain rules, and Mexico is in a unique position over pretty much anybody else to figure out what those rules are and create solutions for them. And then the last thing that I think is going to be very important is the online platforms. Again, looking at Canada, right? In Canada, the average age of consumers was about, what does it say here? It was younger people, 18 to 34. But once it became legal at a federal level, the age is going more to like 35 to 54, right? I mean, people of different ages, now that it's legal, are starting to get curious about cannabis. And different people require different sources of information. The other thing about cannabis is because it's been illegal for so long, a lot of the information is very tribal. And so if you look online, there's a lot of conflicting information, right? And I think, the Mexican audience has different questions, different age groups have different questions. And so creating a platform for people to learn, I think, is going to be very important. And you have to think about the different demographics that you're trying to address with this. There's also going to be a lot of new jobs created, and people who find these jobs or post these jobs are going to require a different platform than, for example, the banking industry, right? And so there's another opportunity there for people to kind of learn about the jobs and post these jobs. And last but not least, I think people are going to be interested about the different strains, the different stores that exist, where they can find different quality. And so there's going to be an online platform that is going to rate all these stores, all the different strains, and it's going to compile a lot of the information so that it's accessible to most people in Mexico. So I think those three opportunities are great, and I would focus on those because those are immediate things that are going to be required as part of cannabis when it starts.
Now, a question that not only deals with cannabis, in my perspective, but on how to actually start a disruptive business. Because there's a difference in terms of mindset, the sophistication level you seek. Some people think that when you're starting out, it's all gonna be like Shark Tank. You have a good pitch. Perhaps you have a good idea, but the most important thing, and we say it in the firm all the time, is particularly in a country like Mexico, the majority of companies are SMEs, and startups are no exception. You have to start with basic structural questions. Hey, do you have good finance education? Hey, do you have good management? Hey, do you have good processes? Do you understand how you have to iterate when coming out with a new product? The example you set, and you mentioned a few moments ago, okay, right now with Annaboto, we only focus on cannabis, but there's nothing that prevents us from eventually expanding to growing other type of vegetable material, fruits, vegetables, whatever. But the important thing is that you go one step at a time. You have to create a scalable business, and that is difficult. I would say there's even a cultural mindset in that. You want to, as we say in Spanish, you want to eat up the world. You want to take over the world, and you want to have a quick ROI instead of focusing on what you're good at first. So I would like you to first talk to us about the general considerations when starting a company in general, a startup, and then focusing that, and then focus your answer on cannabis as such.
Yep, absolutely. So let's start with the next slide. I think you said it right. I mean, starting a company is a very intense emotional journey. It is not easy, right? And I like this diagram because, like you said, I mean, if you're in the A section, that's the eating the world part, right? You're super excited. You're talking to people, we're going to make a lot of money. We're going to create a solution that people are going to love. And then you get your first roadblock, right? And then you get into this valley of despair where you just have so many issues and it's just hard, right? Starting a company is very, very hard. So I think the first thing that people need to figure out is whether they are up for this, whether they have the stamina, whether they're going to be able to work for free for maybe multiple years, right? It's going to cause a lot of sleeplessness, a lot of anxiety. I mean, a lot of the things that cannabis happens to be good at, it's going to be caused by starting a company. And, I was listening to Mitch Borakowitz conversation earlier. And one of the things that he said that resonated is, find people who share your same values, right? You don't want to go in this journey alone. You want to go in this journey with people who share your values, who are honest, who are transparent, who are going to ask for help when they need it, because it's going to be a very challenging journey. This is the journey for starting a company, a tech company, or any company in general. If we go to the next slide, that's my interpretation of what it looks like starting a cannabis company. Cannabis is hard. It's really, really hard. And I even have a little funny thing in there that sometimes it even looks like, time is going backwards. And the reason I say that is everything is changing quickly, very quickly. And things that you thought you had figured out, all of a sudden there's a new law that changes things. I'll give you an example. I've been trying to make these parts out of plastic. I thought that we had somebody who was going to help us with it. And all of a sudden they came back and said, hey, listen, we thought we could do this, but our founders are very conservative and they don't want to touch cannabis with a 10-foot pole, right? And so, banking is hard. Lawyers, you have to find special lawyers. You have to understand all the rules, not only at a federal level, but also at a local level. So it's just, starting a company is hard. Starting a cannabis company is incredibly hard. So make sure that you have the emotional stamina, the right people to help you with this journey. But one of the nice things about creating a company is you get to pick the people that you work with, right? And you get to build an incredible team, and you get to pick the solution that you want to focus on. And one of the things that is very incredible about cannabis is the customers. They're amazing. They're amazing people. We've done hundreds of user interviews, and you talk to them and they're just the nicest people. And all they want is to be able to have access to this high quality cannabis plant. They're just nice people, right? And I think that's unique to this industry. So there are a lot of ups and downs for sure, but make sure that you have the stamina, right? All right, so now let's go to the next slide. Let's say that you do have the stamina, you wanna create a company. There's a philosophy that I like that's called design thinking. And really what I like to say is just because you can build a company doesn't mean that you should, right? And so if you see this Venn diagram, it looks at, all right, is there a technology that exists that can solve this problem? And it's the best way to solve this problem. Is there a market that actually wants to buy this product? And will the market actually pay for this solution, right? And if you're not working in the intersection of these three things, which is the design thinking bit, then you shouldn't start a company, right? If the technology is not going to be the best solution, if there is no market for it, and if you're not going to make any money on it, then why do this, right? And so make sure that you find something that intersects these three circles. And
I would also add to that you have to be ready to tell yourself the truth. Because
yes, exactly.
Like as an entrepreneur, you either second guess yourself or you sweeten the pill, as we say in this country, right?
Yeah, correct.
You have to be ready to come up with, hey, if this is not working, if I have to refine that, I have to be ready to listen to that and listen to the people who share your vision.
Yeah, and you have to be honest with yourself, like you said. And that's why having a good team that is also honest and where you can communicate and they're telling you when something's not going to work, then you can figure something else out, right? And you can maneuver. But it is important. And I think, based on your point, there are two mantras that I have. One is perfect is the enemy of good. In an industry that is changing so quickly and moving so quickly, you don't want anything to be perfect. You want something to be good enough, and you can always optimize later, but you need to get to market as soon as possible, right? And so don't focus on something being perfect, focus on something being good enough. And then once you put it in the hands of customers, understand what's working, what doesn't work, and then you can optimize, right? You can iterate. And
they design your product.
Yeah, exactly, right? I mean, now you have customers who are actually using your product, who are seeing your vision. And like you said, be honest with yourself. Maybe your vision wasn't correct, but you found this other segment, right? And so you're not going to find this until you go to market. And the other bit that's here, it's missing a few words. Wholeness is better than perfect, which I think is actually kind of interesting how it happened. But, I like to think about providing a solution, not another problem, right? And so when we think about a product like what we're describing, we need to give you the complete solution. The last thing we want is to give you something, and then you have to go buy other things to make it work, right? We should be designing something so that in 80% of the cases, it works without any additional thing. But have the right hooks in place so that if somebody needs to add to it, they have those hooks, right? And they can keep finding the solution in the product. If we go to the next slide, there's this, we were talking about the process, and this is my, a design thinking cheat sheet, which is first, find something that people love, right? I mean, you want to get people excited. You want to have people that want to use your product. And then you want to go talk to these people. I cannot tell you how important it is to talk to people, talk to everybody. And one of the things that I've learned is that people love to talk, and they'll give you their ideas, right? And once you have enough conversations, you're going to start forming a point of view of what is the problem that you're trying to solve and how you should solve it, right? And then you come up with ideas of how to solve this problem, and then you create a prototype. And it goes back to my previous point about, get the product out there as soon as possible, see how people are using it, see how, what works, what doesn't work. And then you iterate, right? And you test and you do this over and over and over again. And hopefully you get into this point where people are already using your product, they're loving it, they're buying it, but never stop, right? Always continue iterating, always listen to your customers, always improve. There's a lot of nice things around this in manufacturing, like constant, current, always improve, always optimize. And starting a company is like everything else. And so, hopefully people can take something from this and learn about what it is to start a company and how they can benefit from things like this.
So how can you get people to help you? Yeah, because the most important thing as a startup founder, I would suppose, is to have the right idea. Okay, if you have the right idea, you have people who back it, people who. So what tips? What was your experience in this regard, and what tips would you share? Could you share with the audience?
Yeah, I mean, there's, if you go to the next slide, I have a bunch of tips there. I mean, cannabis, starting a company, there's a lot of things that relate to other bits of starting a company. One of the first things that I would say is, before you approach any investor or anything like that, make sure that you have a solution and that there is an actual market, right? I mean, these investors are listening to so many different ideas. There is so much noise, especially in an industry that is growing exponentially like cannabis. You want to make sure that when you have that opportunity to pitch, you know for a fact that there is a market and you have a solution, right? And the only way to do this is to talk to as many people as you can. I mean, talk to hundreds of people who use the product, people who don't use the product. Just try to understand. And in the way, you're going to be listening to you're going to get some insights. And when you pitch to investors, sharing these insights is very important, because they will know that you've actually done your homework, and that you've made sure that there's a market and people want to buy this product, right? Another thing before you approach investors is make sure that you have a phenomenal team. Like I said, cannabis is harder than most other sectors. It's very, very challenging. Things are moving all over the place. If you have a great team that can deal with all this variation, as well as create the technical innovations and be tenacious, then that is something that investors are looking at, right? I mean, Mitch Barakowitz was saying that as well. It's, if you have a good team and you're going to be able to deal with all the variation, those are the people that you want to bet on, because those are the people who are going to deal with everything that the cannabis industry is going to bring their way. The other thing that is interesting, and this is particular to the cannabis industry, is understanding your local laws, right? And the marketing rules. Because cannabis is unlike everything else. And if you use cannabis in your name, Google AdWords is perhaps not going to work very well for you. People are going to be afraid of putting things around cannabis just because, it's still illegal in the US, right? And so what you name your company is going to be very important. If you have cannabis in your name, yes, on the one hand, you're telling exactly what your company is doing to your users. On the other one, you're going to have some limitations on how you use digital marketing tools in a country like the US, where it's still federally illegal, right? And so understanding these things is very important. And obviously, when you go to talk to investors and you understand these things, again, you did your homework, right? So now let's say you did all your homework and you're ready to start pitching to investors. One of the things that I recommend heavily is understanding when you're going to need the money and why. Fundraising takes a lot of time. I mean, if you think that it's going to take you 6 months, it's probably going to take you a year. And if you don't know when you're going to use the money, then you don't know when to start fundraising, right? And if it's going to take you way longer than expected, and you're going to get to the end, and once you raise the money, you're going to realize you need more money, then you're going to have to start fundraising again. And so coming up with a real good budget is very important, and understanding when you need this money is also going to be important so that you can plan for it, right? There's a lot of planning involved. But also, it's important to understand how much money you need and whether you actually need VC money, right? I mean, there are pros and cons to everything, but there are many options. There's crowdsourcing, there's VCs, there's friends and family, there's loans. There's a lot of things that you can use to leverage all these options to start a company, and you have to understand what the pros and cons are for each.
You raised a very important point because, yeah, oftentimes, of course, particularly in the American offices of Harrisburg, and because the market is more developed, but we have seen this very often with the startups. They ask for seed money before it's time. They spend it up, and then they are looking for legal representation because now the investors are asking for their money back. Because, hey, you gave me prospects of ROI, and I don't see anything. I don't see you growing, so I'm threatening to sue you because hey, you misrepresented what you were going to do with the company. And this is a big issue. I mean, this could end a company. I don't know if you have heard of similar cases, but it's a very point.
I mean, you're right. I think as a rule of thumb, you should estimate that things are always going to take at least twice as long, and you're always going to need twice as much money or more. So, plan for that. But let's say now you're ready, you know that you want to go talk to VCs, pitching and iterate is going to be super important, right? I mean, go pitch, test your message. Starting a cannabis company is hard, like I've said many times. Make sure that everybody understands that. But pitch, right? I mean, start talking to people, see what resonates, what doesn't resonate. Iterate quickly, right? The same way that you're doing the product. I mean, in this case, the VCs or whoever you're pitching to are going to be your customers. Let's understand what it is that makes sense to them, how they're thinking about the problem, and then make sure that the next time you pitch to anybody, you take this into account and you're iterating, right? I mean, I think I've gone through 100 different pitch decks, and every single time I pitch to somebody, I learned something new. So keep that in mind, and obviously make sure that your messaging can tell a story, right? It's easier to explain what you're trying to do if there's a story that people can follow, instead of just kind of putting a bunch of facts and having, something that is very difficult to understand, right? And then the last thing that I want to say is cannabis is different, right? It's new. And because of that, you're going to have to educate your investors a lot, right? You're going to have the investors who know a lot about cannabis. They know the cannabis market, but perhaps they don't understand what artificial intelligence is, or robotics, or how to use it, right? And so you need to teach these customers or these investors on what are the benefits of using technology in cannabis. On the other hand, you have people who have been investing in technology for so long. They understand all the lingo, they know SaaS, they know AI, all this other stuff, but they don't know cannabis. And, for a lot of people, it's illegal still. And so you're going to have to educate them on both. And that's where I think the biggest takeaway that I've gotten from pitching in the cannabis industry or cannabis technology company is this: the education part has been, I don't think I understood it until I started pitching. I've had to create essentially two different types of pitch decks, one for cannabis investors and the other one for tech investors. And I try to teach them about the other in a way that then, when I tell my story, it makes sense. And it makes sense that this technology works for cannabis and that cannabis is the right market to apply this technology in.
Okay, great. Hey, we have a question from the audience. Ms. Amy King is asking you whether any of this data collection take place using blockchain or open source technology.
Absolutely. I mean, I think your blockchain is going to be one of those other tools that's going to be incredibly useful in the cannabis industry. And we are thinking about using blockchain in order to kind of have this ledger of information and have it all be available. Also for traceability, I think it's going to be very important to understand what's happening where, who's using what seed, things like that. So absolutely. I mean, we are thinking about using blockchain. We haven't implemented it yet, but it is something that is on our radar as things to do when we launch this product.
Great. Wow. It's like, I become a student again, man.
So, hey, we should always learn, right? We should continue to learn every single day of our lives.
Okay. So, Fernanda, are there any other questions from the audience? I don't see anything in the chat. No, nothing. Well, this talk was brought to you by Logic, Legal Cannabis Experts and friends of Harrisburg here. Ladies and gentlemen, Carl Palme, founder of Business Robotics Incorporated. Hope with the pandemic is over, hope to meet you in person sometime, either here in Mexico or in the US. Thank you very much for sharing your insights, and most importantly, for sharing them in a way that everyone can understand it. Just like AI, you help democratize learning.
Yeah, no, and thank you, Adrian. This was a great session. Thank you, Logic, for sponsoring this event. I think it's very important for us as a country to do a really good job in cannabis. I mean, we have an opportunity to be leaders in the space. And like Ricardo was saying earlier this morning, let's not mess this up. You know, let's do our best job. Let's try to really be the leaders in the cannabis industry. And yeah, I mean, I'm excited about this. So thank you so much, everybody, for putting this event together.
Thank you for coming. My name is Adrian Cisneros, head of Harrisburg in Mexico. Thank you for attending. Please continue logging into the rest of the webinars today. Today is closing day, and we can all still learn. Have a good afternoon.